Hi, my name is Zach, and I'm the Director of Photography of Sophisticated Fun, and this is Commercial Breakdown. Before we start diving into the scenes, it's important to know what we actually shot this project on. So we kind of went all out for this in terms of the budget, looking at camera, and we shot this on the RE Mini LF paired with the Signature Primes. So with that information, let's start looking at it.
So, if I'm hearing this right, in your dream, you're a detective.
The location that we were working with had a lot of leading lines and stuff I wanted to play into to make it as interesting as possible. I really like to do this in any room, in any location, so I really analyzed it and really maximized how we could make this location not feel like the same thing. We are in a therapy scene and then moving to so many different things, so I really had to think as a cinematographer and maximize the space to look as different as possible. And this was done through the composition and really playing up on the location. We have so many lines that we can reference and lead into that just allows us and the viewer to be directed to exactly what we're looking at. And it's this kind of converging shape that is a really weird house to work in, and it added a lot of challenges as well. It added a lot of character to the piece. And when we start talking about lighting and what this is supposed to look like, it really didn't make sense. If you think about a therapy scene, it's supposed to be an office. It's supposed to be something that is not this played up. It's not supposed to look this, I guess, picture-esque. So we're talking about time of day, when this is supposed to look like, and we were just like, let's do early morning as well as let's have some practicals and lights on and just to add as much interest as possible. So we had a bunch of light fixtures out here blasting in. I believe this was like a 1200D and a 600, just to add some splashes of light onto our subjects as well as to create some shadows and depth. And we had a bunch of lamp fixtures that we wanted in each of these scenes, and our production designers sourced these, and then we just had simple B7C bulbs set to a very warm tone, and then we have another one here giving us so many different pockets of light. In my work, I like to create so many different pockets of lights, especially when it comes to commercials, because I am trying to create a checkerboard of color here. I am trying to create as much interest as possible between contrast with light and dark parts, as well as contrast with color. There's so many ways to light a scene, and not necessarily the way I did it was technically right. There's so many ways you could do this right, but I saw this, and this is more speaking towards my voice. The funny thing is when we first saw this location, we're like, there's lots of potential here, but there's so much work to be done. And I believe this was like the hardest location I've ever worked in, because due to the nature of the piece, I had to shoot maybe 5 to 6 different scenes in one house. So basically, if we were to draw this house on sort of a square and then break it up into 4 different things, I have like 4 corners to shoot in, 4 different scenes that I can build out, but now where is my 5th one? And you'll see that later where we actually did that outside. The detective scene was one of my favorite scenes to shoot just because of what we got to do with the color contrast, camera movements, as well as just interest in kind of getting as many interesting shots in the piece as possible. To make anything feel real as well as not real at the same time, if you catch my drift, because that's what commercials are. There's so many little pockets of light that don't even make sense in the real world. Like, why would I be lighting this map in the background and have a light on my desk and have some light going on here? But that is cinematography, that is filmmaking, kind of making something look unworldly. And that was my main task throughout this whole thing, to make things as interesting as possible, and you do that with lights. So I have a little controllable bulb in this one, spraying some light on there. We had this desk lamp that luckily worked for our exposure, because working with real lamps, it's kind of really difficult to expose them. And then we just have a panel light basically motivating that light. So I have something overhead here, and I have another set of diffusion, and then this is just lighting the desk and table, everything here, to give me basically that this light is reaching all the way over here. And then we just added a bunch of things in the desk to make it look as messy as possible. And this really helps build the depth into the entire frame and fill up everything as well. And then when we talk about contrast and we talk about color specifically, we're going for this heavy orange and teal look. So we basically set all our fixtures and all these small little things to 2700 Kelvin. And then I had some tube lights in the background. So one was kind of hanging over on this side, and then another one was hanging on this side. And we didn't want any to spill back on the talent. We wanted the talent to be very orange, and especially when you talk about lighting skin tones and everything like that, when you're lighting especially darker skin tones, I always stick to 2700 Kelvin with my fixtures, especially when I'm trying to build something this real, because it just really plays up on my dark skin. And then with the tubes in the background, we had them set to like a cyan color. Then we actually kind of flagged these off so there wasn't any spill onto our talent. I just wanted this back on our background. And then that is just playing it to give us even more depth, because I want to build depth in kind of multiple ways. One, with my lensing and composition. Two, with my contrast in terms of light and dark. And then three, color contrast to have even more interest. And if we go back to the previous frame, this whole thing, we are a detective at night. And this is what I was playing up into this blue over here. So that's why we see the continuity as we go over, and we had that spill onto the walls. Because we shot this in the middle of the day, and we had to basically black out everything behind me, and we did this with multiple duvs and multiple rags and everything that we basically could find. But then we had a bunch of daylight spilling in the background, because realistically, we didn't have the budget to black out the entire house. So my next tool as a cinematographer is, how can I change my settings to do that? And I just rated my camera at a very low white balance, so all the lights that was white light, basically daylight coming in, would look and appear very blue, and that's associated with night. This is a really fun shot to pull off, because we are basically in the perspective of our detective here. One of the tools that I always keep on me is friction arms, because you never know when they're coming handy, and we already planned for this shot, obviously. But the way we kind of pulled this off is, if we draw the camera, and every camera has some sort of rod system, and then we just put a friction arm, clamped it to our magnifying glass, and that's how we shot it. And then it was really funny, because we didn't necessarily know what to focus on, and then I had my first AC go back and forth to really find it, because we're dealing with a magnifying glass, and it was really weird. And we're like, okay, focus on the page, and that was kind of the best thing at the time. And then I just held the camera. It was about, I would say, 25 pounds, and I was just moving around like this, and it really gave that good perspective of what we're trying to do, and it really added to the scene. I feel like this was my favorite shot in the scene. We just figured out in a lot of situations, you can just hold the camera yourself, or even if you want the talent's hands in there, take an FX3, put a 12 mil on it, hold it like this with them, and then move around. That's all you need. You don't really need complicated setups to pull off interesting shots like this. When we talk about the final reveal, to say that he's actually doing a crossword, which was kind of funny. This was originally supposed to be a top-down shot when we planned it, and then I had this whole dolly rig set up, everything was perfect, and then I realized with what we had in terms of the gear and the tripod head, we couldn't necessarily go completely 90. We actually had to go at a 45, which actually worked out a lot better. I feel like a top-down in this case would be a little bit too kind of, I would say, corporate. This is kind of really storytelling and artistic, and this even builds more depth, allows you to look at so many different shadows and everything like that. So again, I like to call this whole setup a happy accident. It was just one of the things where I communicated with the director. I'm like, hey, we can't go 90 degrees, but we both looked at it. This is better. And we kind of like, yeah, we planned this, you know? And then when we go into the next shot, we are actually doing a top-down on the newspaper. So this really kind of played up in terms of like the camera is going at a 45 degree, and then it goes immediately top. So automatically the viewer kind of assumes that motion in between, and it was a really interesting thing when we actually looked at the edit. But the way we achieved this, we actually shot this flat on the desk, where we just had, this is the desk, and then we just had the camera on a tripod, and then we just had an Apple box on the desk, and then it just had the paper there, and we kind of stuck it to it. But it was just really funny, because we're like, oh, we're gonna have to set this overhead, and then we're like, why do we have to do that? We can just shoot it. And it took maybe an eighth of a time rather than doing that whole setup. So if you guys want more educational content like this, go check out our course, Cine Lighting Labs, where we show you exactly how you can execute a project like this from a fundamentals of lighting as well as execution and problem solving. Pre-sale is on now, and we're dropping the course on November 29th. Go check out the link in the description below to find out more.
Interesting. And you said something about feelings.
So we shot this scene at the top of the day. And I believe that we arrived there at 8, and this was one of the hottest days of the summer. It was about probably 30 degrees outside and close to 38 degrees inside the house. This is degrees Celsius, and it was absolutely terrible. But the sun and everything played out for us very well because this was early in the morning and that we planned this. So we have a bunch of sunlight just coming in here. And we basically had access to like a 1200D and like a 600D. And then I had various Fresnels and spotlights that I could do that. So I was playing up on how can I add different streaks of light that add to this as well. Because if you look at this, it's very light over here, and then it's a nice gradient, and then we see a bunch of information in the background. So I was just trying to boost up this side with the light fixtures I had. So we shot the 1200D through here, and this is backlighting our subject and giving us a nice patch of light here. And then I shot the 600D, and there's actually a door frame here with a spotlight mount, and this was through here, and this was giving me this kind of cut of light as well as some dappled here. So that's what I like to do with my high-powered fixtures, even though they're not considered that high-powered, just because I knew what I was working with. Again, it was just working with what we had. As we were moving very quickly, and obviously we shot the therapy scene like back to back to back, there's a lot of kind of small things that we missed, and unfortunately we Game of Thrones ourselves, and there's a water bottle sitting right here. No one really noticed it, and it was the talent's just water bottle, and we just forgot about it. And then me, additionally, as a director of photography, I forgot to turn on this light because it died during the scene, so there's actually no light there. Not everybody knows, and we only notice these things when we watch it back, and it honestly keeps me awake at night. In every commercial, there's one scene that you always dread, and this was the last one that we shot of the day, and I was not looking forward to this because we basically wanted to do this thing that he was going nowhere, and it was a logistical nightmare because we wanted him in multiple places, and this was different places inside the house. We didn't want to just necessarily shoot in all the places that we already did, so we kind of just used the hallways and intersection in the house, and then finally ended up on the end here. And this is something that we had to basically, if our talent is standing here, and then our camera is here, we marked the height as well as the distance from the camera, so if we label that X and label that Y, we just did that with a measuring tape, and then we just kept that consistent through the entire actual scene that we're shooting. But why I hated this the most is because we had to move everything. Basically, we're shooting all these wide shots that you see everything in the background. This is the main shot that I'm talking about in the house. This is where the therapy session was happening, so therapy. And then we had the sounds speaker one over here, and then the detective one and the art one was over here. But basically, because we were dealing with such a small house and we didn't necessarily have anything outside, we had to constantly clear these rooms and clear everything that was in the back room. And then now when we're shooting this final scene, it's just like, oh, we have to move everything. It's the end of the day. Everybody's tired. So it was kind of a really big hustle to do this. But in the end, it turned out great. And I'm glad that we hustled to actually get it done.
Going nowhere. Do you feel like you're going nowhere in life? So tell me about this print you see.
A big reference that everybody uses when they talk about this is La La Land, where they're going back from Emma Stone to Ryan Gosling. Obviously, this is no La La Land because that was very impressive, but this was kind of my first time doing that, and this was done in one take. There was nothing really done and cut in post with trying to hide whips and everything like that. We tried to make it authentic and as in camera as possible, so the timing and everything was done, and this took a lot of takes. I'd probably say 12, and it was more so not necessarily me landing on the finals and everything. It was more so getting the perfect timing for the talent, as well as just actor blocking and everything like that. And then when we talk about this between a logistics standpoint, basically the camera is here, and then it whips over here, and then we're pointing at our other talent here, so this is position 1, 2, and then going back, and this is kind of our 3, right? And then a big thing is I wanted to maintain the same light side, and for him, the light is already hitting here from the sun just due time of day, so that was just good planning. But on our opposite side, the sun is kind of coming in at this direction. So we do have some ambient here, so what I actually had to do is I literally just put a stand here with a light that was boomed overhead that is lighting our talent. But because the whip is so fast, I knew that we could get away with it. A lot of people would look at this and be like, oh, that's difficult, we can't necessarily light it, but I'm like, oh, this is a whip. We can hide so much in between. Everybody does it in post already, so it was easy to do that.
This print you see everywhere.
So this house in this corner especially, we were dealing with a bunch of, I don't exactly know, I think it was mold, it was dirt, it was something up in the corners here, but you can see that adds contrast, it adds gradient, it adds something more interesting, but in actuality, it's not really, it's kind of disgusting. I would say this is my favorite shot out of the entire piece when it comes to cinematography, lighting, just building as many layers as possible. And we originally had the idea to shoot through this clear palette that you see on screen kind of here, right? So this is the palette that we're working with, and then we had him kind of smear some of these colors together. And then again, our production designer sourced all this stuff for us, and it was absolutely amazing. And then you kind of see the edge of the painting here, which adds to that color. And going to what this brand is about and just the color contrast that they have, it just plays up so well with everything that we're doing. So we just had a panel light inside, and that was just basically matching the daylight that's on his face. And then we had a massive window over here, and then we just had another point source, adding some dapple, adding some highlights to the edge of his face. I really like to wrap my light around the subject in certain situations and add contrast back to it. Again, I'm trying to build light and dark parts of my image, and then when we specifically, I feel like this was a really good place to really get that highlight, especially roll off when we talk about his face, from this harsh sunlight to a kind of middle patch here that goes into a dark gradient, and then we have some Rembrandt lighting here, and then a huge catch light on his eyes, so it makes it as interesting as possible. And then we have some highlight and edge light here. And that is just from the other window that we're dealing with. We're shooting into a corner here, and I don't necessarily know how to draw that, but it was like this, right? And then our subject is kind of sitting here, and then there's kind of two windows that are sandwiching him. This is my favorite frame in the actual piece, but in actuality, when we're shooting it, I'm like, this place is disgusting. I don't want to be in this room anymore. So this was a VFX shot where we only had budget to print basically one of these canvases, and it's the one that he's placing and interacting with. The ones that you see here, this one, this one, this one, and this one, these are all VFX. Me as a cinematographer, I'm like, I have to shoot over 180-degree shutter to maintain as much as natural motion blur, and then the VFX artist is like, I can put that back in post. But you kind of have to let the expert who's done this so many times literally listen to them. This was a big collaborative project working with so many different people who really wanted to hop on this and really kind of make a portfolio piece for themselves. So we took a seat back and say, like, all these experts are helping us. I'm gonna listen to them. I'm not gonna let my ego take over and say, oh no, we don't have to do that. We have to do it like this. These are people who are known in their field and also have so much experience with it. So again, when you're trying to get any type of VFX shot, always just align with your VFX artist. But this one, where we're dealing with a reflection here, we actually shot this on site because you can see how real the reflection is. I was like, interesting, how's he gonna do that? But he said he could, no problem, and he did it. So it really turned out well, and it sells it. A lot of small details like this where you see the reflection in the painting, you wouldn't bat an eye twice to see that, but this wasn't on set.
So what do you think?
This is where the therapist is probing him a little bit and saying, what do you think? And he's kind of like dazing off. He's a little bit uncomfortable. He's a little bit uneasy. And generally with feelings of unease, we achieve that with a Dutch angle. So this was just me sitting on one of the ledges, and I just took a sandbag, put it on an angle, and then shot this on a telephoto lens. If you look at the coverage throughout this entire scene, we're dealing with a lot of wide wides, a lot of kind of medium tights, and then also a lot of kind of telephoto wides. That's what I like to call it. When you're shooting on a longer lens and it's a wide shot, it gives you the entire body, but there's some sort of compression here. When I like to shoot my commercials, I usually like to stay in the 12 millimeter to 25, and then I kind of only shoot 50 millimeter and above, all the way to kind of, we actually use a zoom in this piece, which we're going to be talking about later, all the way up to 250 or whatever I can get to, even 600. This really differentiates my style of work and what I like to do. I like to jump back between wide wides and kind of different types of tight shots, if that makes sense, when we talk about these photo lengths and going that telephoto.
So what do you think?
When we talk about the technical aspect of this project, again, we shot this on the RE Mini LF, so this is large format, and then we also shot this on the Signature Prime, so I'll just say Sig Primes. And what these lenses are known for is their sharpness. These lenses, and it gives you that look and that fall off that everybody looks for, especially in commercial look. We are working with something that is extremely high dynamic range because these windows are frosted, but they're completely blown out from an exposure perspective, but it gives you a nice fall off as well. When we look at the face and we look at everything that's going on, these lenses stop down to 1.8. I generally like to shoot my work from a 2.8 to, when we talk about T-stops here, to like a T4, but I was primarily shooting in this because I asked myself as a cinematographer, and I also communicated with the director, this is supposed to feel more dreamy, this is supposed to feel kind of out of this world and everything like that, and that is really associated with low enough T-stops. And especially us as cinematographers, gearheads, or anybody who likes lensing, I'm gonna shoot at the lowest T-stop as possible. But I don't really like to do that in my work. I like the deep focus elements of everything. But I've only used these lenses twice. I absolutely love these lenses for that basically skin rendition and how it reproduces the look on skin. And when we talk about skin and talking about looking at people, especially when we talk about this combo right here, I say talk a lot. When we're looking at the combination of lensing, this gives you that pop. When we talk about contrast and that larger than life feel, this feels very unrealistic, but there's something that feels very artistic about it. And it's just beautiful when we talk about cinematography, filmmaking, and what makes a beautiful image. And again, I absolutely love these lenses, but I would only use them for specific things like this when I'm shooting on something that low of a T-stop. But for general work, I would love to shoot these, but it's super unrealistic because they're very expensive.
What do you think? So, what do you think?
So when originally we got this concept, Jason and I, the director, worked on it together. He had a bunch of fun ideas, and then we just looked at the lookbook of the actual campaign, and there was a lot of words that were speaking to us. Therapy, pant, Picasso bug, Picasso print, and there was just so many things that we could play up on. Even the hat for the actual detective scene was called Sherlock Homie. So it was very easy. It inspired so much creativity in us because the names were so out there and they were very well done. There's so much thought process in making this collection, so it was just very easy to be creative. And it was just Jason and I kind of working back and forth. I was sitting on my computer kind of typing everything out, and then he was just throwing out ideas at me, and then we kind of built that story together. And he gave me all these buzzwords, and then I would just add on to that in terms of just like, oh, we could do this with this camera movement. We could tell this story through so many different aspects through these things. And we were getting way too excited because we had too many ideas at that point, and we're like, okay, let's lock in, bring it down, concise it, let's find a story first, let's pitch it back to them. They already loved it from the get-go, and then we're like, okay, now we can break this up into individual scenes. So we had the therapy scene, detective, paint, sound, going nowhere. So these were the 5 scenes that we were dealing with, and then my biggest challenge as a cinematographer is the story was already locked. How can we transition between these cleanly without being too gimmicky? A lot of times in a commercial work, do a lot of whips, do a lot of going through things and everything like that. We want to steer away from that as possible. This was our first kind of piece that we would say that was fashion, that had a story. And this is kind of the piece that we're known for and that we kind of advertise as our main work that we want to produce, me as a cinematographer especially, right? So we had to cleanly go through basically all these things and then also go back to the therapy so many different times and keep that as consistent as possible. When we talk about the amount of shots that we did, I would have to look at the shot list, I don't even know, but we used every single thing. But when we talk about getting different types of intercuts or different types of inserts, I wish we got more of those, but we unfortunately just didn't have time. So you can absolutely plan for everything, and you can do that in the pre-production process, location scout, and 100% if you're doing any type of project, I always like to shoot previses. Unfortunately, we didn't have time to do an entire previs, but we tested some sort of shots. But when you do a previs, which is just basically shooting the project before it's even on set, this allows you to see what will and what won't work in the edit so you don't waste time on set. I feel like we didn't really waste time on set because we were locked to a specific story. It would just be nice to say, we're missing a few shots, can we get them quickly, even with a different camera? This was kind of a big learning experience for me. I had a lot of fun on this project, especially when it came out. I feel like this was a very big test towards my work and what I want to create. And this, I would say, is a big staple and kind of stepping stone as me as a director of photography and basically leveling up and what I want to do in the future.